Hello, everyone. Tonight, if you are lying in bed, pulling the covers up a little tighter, relaxing your shoulders, and letting your eyes slowly close, then the story we are about to journey through might take you very far back into the past. So far back that the roads were still caked in mud, cold stone castles stood silent amidst the mist, and human life was sometimes as fragile as a candle flame before the wind. Tonight, we'll talk about a profession that is often told in legends as something mysterious and fearsome, the medieval assassin. But the truth is, if you truly lived in that era and were pushed onto this path, your life likely wouldn't resemble the heroic legends. Instead, it would be a long string of days filled with fear, solitude, and never-ending danger. The story begins on an autumn evening in a small village nestled on the edge of the Black Forest, north of the Kingdom of Arden. The wind swept through the low thatched roofs, carrying the scent of smoke from dying hearths. The villagers had shuttered their doors early. In those times when the sun set, the world seemed to belong to the darkness, and no one dared to venture out after nightfall. But one man was still awake. His name was Elias. No one in the village knew exactly where Elias came from. He appeared 3 years ago, leading a gaunt horse and wearing a frayed gray cloak. He spoke little, did odd jobs in exchange for food, and always left the tavern before the conversations grew loud. People only knew one thing. Elias was always watching. He watched how the guards patrolled. He watched the paths leading out of town. And sometimes, in the flickering light of the tavern fire, someone would notice his gaze lingering a long time on the swords hanging upon the walls. But no one asked questions. In the Middle Ages, there were questions better left unasked. The truth was, Elias had once been an assassin. Not the kind of assassin from glamorous tales, not someone who leapt from rooftops like a ghost and vanished into the night. In reality, his work usually began with waiting for a very long time. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. He had to live like a shadow, hiding among ordinary people, pretending to be a merchant, a beggar, or a deserting soldier. Because in that era, an assassin could never let anyone know who they truly were. If caught, the penalty was usually the gallows, or worse. Medieval lords did not take kindly to being assassinated, and they had many creative ways to make a captured man regret ever trying. Elias knew that better than anyone, because years ago he had seen someone like himself get caught. It was a cold morning in the city of Calden. The square was packed. A wooden stake was erected in the center, and the man was tied to it. Elias still remembered the man's eyes. They weren't filled with fear, but with exhaustion. The crowd screamed, and the guards stood around with long pikes. When the flames began to lick at the man's feet, Elias turned away, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that could be the future of any assassin. And that is why the life of a medieval assassin was nothing like what people imagined. There was no glory, no fame, only darkness, and missions you could not refuse. Elias took his first contract when he was only 19. It was raining heavily that day. He was sitting in a derelict stable outside the city when a man in a black cloak entered. The man didn't give his name. In their world, names didn't matter. He placed a small pouch of coins on the table, and a knife. "There is a merchant," the man said softly. "He knows too much." That was all. No further explanation. No questions. In the world of assassins, the less you knew, the longer you lived. But Elias quickly learned another truth. Every mission could be your last. Because in medieval cities, guards were everywhere. High stone walls surrounded the districts. Dark alleys were filled with thieves and spies. And sometimes, your target wasn't weak. Some hired bodyguards. Some lived in fortresses. Some were waiting for you to arrive. Elias once lost 2 friends that way. One was spotted by guards while scaling a wall. The other vanished during a mission and was never heard from again. Perhaps he escaped. Or perhaps his body still lies somewhere at the bottom of a cold river. That is what made the profession so miserable. It wasn't the fighting. It was having to live with fear every single day. You didn't know who might recognize you. You didn't know who was watching. And you didn't know if the one who hired you would decide to eliminate you once the job was done. In that world, loyalty usually only lasted as long as the coin stayed in your palm. Elias understood this all too well. And that was why he left the city to live in the small village by the forest's edge. He thought he could escape the past. But on a cold autumn night, as the wind howled through the black woods and the moon was swallowed by thick clouds, Someone knocked on the door of his small wooden hut. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. Elias opened the door. The man standing outside wore a black cloak, identical to the one who had given him his first mission years ago. The man didn't say much. He only placed a heavy pouch of coins on the table and a map. "There is a lord," he said, "and he is about to start a war." Elias looked at the map. The target was in a fortress, deep in the northern mountains, a place almost impossible to reach, a mission almost impossible to survive. And as the candle on the table flickered in the night wind, Elias understood that his peaceful life was over. Because in the world of a medieval assassin, the past always finds its way back. In the previous part, we left off as Elias accepted a new contract. A mission he knew from the very start could be his last. On the small wooden table in his hut at that moment, only 3 things remained: a guttering candle, a heavy pouch of coins, and the map leading to the fortress of Lord Aldrich. That fortress lay deep within the northern mountains, a place where the freezing wind almost never ceased to howl. The roads leading there were winding, narrow, and treacherous. It was not a place a sane man would choose to go, and certainly not a place an assassin could easily depart from once the deed was done. Elias stared at the map for a long time. He was not a man of haste. In his profession, rushing was usually the quickest way to die. He recalled what he knew of Aldrich, a wealthy lord, but famously ruthless. He possessed a loyal company of mercenaries, a formidable stronghold, and more importantly, he rarely ever stepped beyond those stone walls. That made the mission nearly impossible. To kill Aldrich, Elias would have to get inside. And to get inside, he would have to become someone else entirely. 3 days later, Elias departed from the small village at the forest's edge. No one in the village knew where he was going. They only saw his gaunt horse treading slowly down the dirt path at dawn while the mist still clung heavily to the fields. But Elias did not head straight north. Instead, he traveled west, toward a trading town situated near the mountain pass, because a skilled assassin never appears where he is needed, in his true form. By the time Elias reached that town, he was no longer Elias. He had become a blacksmith. His gray cloak was replaced by a worn leather apron, his hands were stained with charcoal and iron dust, and the thin blade hidden in his boot was concealed beneath a layer of coarse cloth. For the first few days, he did nothing but observe. This small town was where supply caravans typically halted before making the ascent to Aldrich's fortress. Salt merchants, timber haulers, stonemasons, everyone had to pass through here. And in the dim taverns on the corner, Elias began to hear the stories. One man said Aldrich's fortress had 3 gates. Another said the guards changed shifts every 4 hours. Someone even whispered that Lord Aldrich had recently grown paranoid, believing that someone wanted him dead. Elias said nothing. He simply sat in the corner, slowly sipping a mug of watered-down ale and listening. It was the part of the job few people ever considered. The majority of an assassin's time isn't spent fighting, but waiting. A week passed, then 2. During that time, Elias familiarized himself with the townsfolk. He shod the horses of several merchants, helped an old smith sharpen axe heads, and gradually, he became a familiar face. No one suspected him. That was exactly what he needed. Finally, on a biting cold morning, the largest supply caravan of the month prepared to leave town for the fortress. The wagons were laden with barrels of wine, sacks of flour, and salted meats. About 10 mounted guards rode alongside to protect the cargo from bandits. Elias stood nearby, pretending to check the hooves of a pack mule. As the caravan master walked past, Elias spoke up. He claimed to be a blacksmith, and surely the mountain fortress would have need of someone to repair weaponry. The master looked him over for a long moment. In the Middle Ages, a blacksmith was a prized profession. A fortress might have hundreds of swords and spears, but without someone to fix them when they snapped or dulled, they were nothing but scrap iron. Finally, the master nodded, and just like that, Elias had found a way into the heart of the stronghold. But he knew one thing clearly. Getting inside was only the first step. The most dangerous part still lay ahead. 2 days later, the caravan began the climb up the mountain road. The path was narrow and strewn with rocks. On one side stood a sheer cliff. On the other, a ravine shrouded in mist. The wind blew so fiercely that the mules sometimes balked, unable to take another step. Elias walked behind a wagon carrying wine barrels. He kept his head low like a common laborer, but his eyes never stopped scanning. He counted the guards. He watched how they spoke to one another. He noted the exact moments when their focus wavered. After nearly half a day of climbing, Aldrich's fortress finally loomed into view. It was larger than Elias had imagined. The stone walls rose up like giants, so thick that even a catapult would struggle to breach them. 2 watchtowers flanked the main gate where guards in heavy plate armor inspected every wagon that entered. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't from the mountain wind. It was the realization that from this moment on, the smallest mistake could cost him his life. When it was his turn, Elias stepped forward. A guard eyed him from head to toe. "Who are you?" Elias answered in a calm, steady voice. "A blacksmith." The guard frowned. "The fortress already has a smith." Elias said nothing more. He simply opened his cloth bag and pulled out a horseshoe he had forged with exquisite skill, something he had prepared well in advance. The guard took it, turning it over in the light. Then he shrugged. "Fine, get inside." The massive wooden gates groaned open. As Elias stepped through the threshold of Aldrich's fortress, he knew he had just entered the most dangerous place he had ever set foot in, because within these cold stone walls, there were hundreds of guards. There were dark corridors that no one knew, and somewhere in the central tower, Lord Aldrich lay sleeping soundly, completely unaware that his death had just walked through the gates. But Elias also knew something else. An assassin can plan for everything, but no plan survives for long once the first night in the fortress begins. And that night, something unexpected happened, something Elias had never foreseen. The man who had stepped through the heavy stone gates of Aldrich's fortress, without a single guard realizing they had just let an assassin inside. The interior of the fortress was far more vast than Elias had imagined from afar. High stone walls enclosed a massive courtyard where guards practiced with spears and swords under the pale light of the late afternoon sun. Stables lined one side of the wall, while opposite them stood a row of storehouses filled with grain and weaponry. The supply caravan ground to a halt in the center of the yard. Soldiers began unloading wooden crates, the clatter of metal echoing through the chilled air. Elias did not rush to leave the wagon he had followed. He stood still for a moment like a laborer waiting to be assigned a task. But in truth, he was observing every walkway, every stairway, and every area the guards frequently patrolled. A good assassin doesn't just look with his eyes, he memorizes everything. After only a few minutes, Elias had realized 3 crucial things. First, there were more guards in this fortress than he had anticipated. Second, the central tower where Lord Aldrich lived was guarded with extreme rigor. And third, the people living within these walls seemed to exist in a state of constant tension. No one laughed. No one looked relaxed. This meant that Aldrich was truly afraid of something. A tall soldier approached Elias. "Are you the new blacksmith?" Elias nodded. The soldier pointed toward a low building near the eastern wall. "The forge is over there. The old smith broke his arm last week." Elias bowed his head in thanks, then walked slowly toward the small structure. It was a dark, sweltering place with a large coal furnace in the center of the room. The walls were hung with hammers, tongs, and unworked iron bars. Elias set his bag down on the table. He wasn't a real blacksmith, but during his years wandering through cities and towns, he had learned enough to play the part. In his profession, knowing various skills is sometimes the only thing that keeps you alive. The afternoon passed slowly. A few guards brought their swords to have the blades sharpened. Another asked for a broken armor clasp to be mended. Elias worked meticulously, not too fast, not too slow, exactly like an ordinary blacksmith. But as the sun began to sink behind the distant mountains, a strange sensation gradually crept over the fortress. The guards increased their patrols. The main gate was shuttered earlier than usual, and in the air, there was a taut, heavy silence. Elias recognized it immediately. Something was about to happen. Night falls swiftly in the mountains. The cold wind seeped through the stone crevices, making the fire in the forge flicker. Elias was preparing to douse the flames when he heard hurried footsteps outside. 2 guards ran past. One spoke in a low voice, yet Elias heard him clearly. "I heard there's an intruder tonight." The other replied, "The Lord says an assassin is trying to infiltrate the fortress." Elias stood perfectly still. Another assassin? That took him by surprise. In this trade, it was rare for 2 people to be hired for the same target. That only happened when the employer trusted no one, or when multiple factions wanted the same man dead. Elias extinguished the forge, stepped outside, and looked up at the night sky. The moon was buried behind thick clouds. The mountain wind whistled through the watchtowers, creating a long, shrill sound like a howl. Aldrich's fortress now felt like a giant trap. If there truly were another assassin here, everything was about to become much more dangerous, not just because the guards would be alert, but because assassins sometimes hunt each other. Elias returned to the small room where he was permitted to sleep. It contained nothing but a simple wooden bed and a small candle on the table. He sat down, pulled off his old boots, and from inside he retrieved the thin knife he always kept hidden. The blade reflected the weak candlelight. For years, this knife had helped him survive missions that seemed impossible. But tonight, he wasn't sure if it would be enough, because somewhere in this fortress, there was someone else. Someone like him. Someone waiting for the right moment. Elias blew out the candle and lay down on the bed, but he did not sleep. Good assassins rarely truly sleep while on a mission. And as the water clock in the courtyard dripped toward midnight, a very faint sound echoed outside the window. A soft thud, as if someone had just landed on the roof. Elias opened his eyes. His hand tightened around the knife, and in the deep shadows of Aldrich's fortress, the true hunt had begun. Outside, the wind might still be blowing softly, much like the way it once swept through the cold stone walls of Aldrich's fortress centuries ago. And at the moment we left off, Elias had just heard a very faint sound upon the roof. A light noise, very light, but to an assassin whose ears were attuned to the silence of the dark, that sound was like a warning cry. Elias did not move immediately. He lay still on the hard wooden bed, eyes wide in the darkness, hand still gripping the thin knife. If there truly was someone on the roof, moving too quickly could give away his position. A few seconds passed, then a minute. The wind whistled through the stone window slit, carrying the mountain chill. And then the sound returned. This time it was slightly clearer. A footfall. Someone was moving across the roof tiles of the building above Elias's small room. He sat up very slowly. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, he moved close to the wall and listened. Not a guard. Guards wore armor, and armor always made noise. The person on the roof moved with almost no sound at all. That could only mean one thing. An assassin. Elias exhaled slowly. In his trade there was a rule never spoken aloud, but understood by all. When two assassins appear on the same contract, only one leaves. He stepped to the window. The window was merely a narrow stone slit, but enough to see the roofline above. The dark tiles were slick with night dew, and in the distance stood the high watchtower where guards were on patrol. At first, Elias saw nothing, but then a dark silhouette blurred past the edge of the roof. Swift, very swift. Elias understood instantly that the other was no amateur. The shadow paused near the edge, then leaped down onto the wooden balcony of the building opposite, without making a sound. Elias frowned. That balcony led to a corridor that connected directly to the central tower, toward Lord Aldrich. The other was acting sooner than he was. Elias didn't have much time to think. He opened his door and stepped into the dark hallway. The torches mounted on the walls had mostly burnt out, leaving only a faint red glow of embers. The fortress at midnight was terrifyingly quiet. There was only the sound of the wind and the occasional distant footfalls of a patrol. Elias moved quickly but without haste. He had learned that running in a fortress full of guards was the best way to draw attention. Instead, he moved like a shadow, from one corner to the next. As he neared the balcony he had seen from his window, Elias stopped. The wooden door was slightly ajar. He gave it a gentle push. The door let out a tiny creak. Outside, the cold wind gusted harder. The narrow wooden balcony ran along the stone wall, with the pitch-black courtyard yawning below. And at the end of the balcony, a figure was standing. The person wore a black cloak, their face hidden beneath dark fabric. But as Elias stepped out and the other turned, the two stared at each other for several seconds. Neither spoke. Two assassins need no explanations. The other was also holding a blade. The wind caught their cloaks, making them flutter softly in the night. Finally, the stranger spoke first, his voice low and steady. "I assume you were hired as well?" Elias did not answer immediately. He studied his opponent. A firm stance, no trembling, no rush. A very dangerous man. "It seems so," Elias said. The stranger chuckled very softly. "How interesting. Lord Aldrich must have earned more hatred than I imagined." Elias looked toward the central tower, where a few torches were still burning. "Do you intend to kill him tonight?" The stranger shrugged. "I intend to try." A strong gust of wind swept across the balcony. In that moment, both understood they were standing before a choice. They could fight each other right here, or they could temporarily ignore one another, because this fortress had too many guards, and if they made a noise, they would both die. The stranger seemed to be thinking the same. He slowly lowered his knife. "We have the same goal," he said, "at least for tonight." Elias did not trust him entirely. But he also knew that infiltrating the central tower alone was near suicidal. "Fine," Elias said at last. The other turned back toward the corridor leading into the tower. "The guards change shifts in 10 minutes, he said. "That is the only window." Elias was surprised. This man had clearly been watching the fortress longer than he had. 2 assassins stood side by side on the narrow wooden balcony, looking toward the place where Lord Aldrich slept behind thick stone walls. But neither of them knew that, inside that tower, Lord Aldrich was also awake, and he had prepared a trap for people like them, because Aldrich was not just a ruthless lord. He was a man who had survived 3 previous assassination attempts, and this time, he had decided that if the assassins came, no one would leave this fortress alive. The tale of Elias and the fortress of Aldrich continues, moving as slowly and cautiously as footsteps in the dark. In the previous part, Elias met a stranger on the stone balcony of the fortress. Another assassin. 2 strangers, both carrying blades, both assigned to kill a man sleeping in the central tower, and in the end, they decided to temporarily set aside their enmity. It wasn't because they trusted each other. It was because Aldrich's fortress was far too dangerous for a man to act alone. The night wind swept across the narrow balcony, carrying the chill of the high mountains. The 2 stood side by side for a long time, observing the central tower. From their vantage point, they could see the stone path leading inside, 2 torches flickering weakly at the entrance, and 4 guards standing watch. The stranger whispered, "The watch will change in a few minutes." Elias didn't ask how he knew. In this trade, everyone has their own ways of gathering intelligence. They simply stood still, waiting. The night grew deeper. The fortress was submerged in a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional clink of metal as the guards shifted. Then the moment arrived. 2 fresh guards approached from the corridor, speaking in low voices to those stationed at the tower door. As they exchanged positions, the attention of all 4 was momentarily diverted. The stranger turned to Elias. "Now." Both moved almost simultaneously. They slipped off the balcony, clinging to the shadows of the stone walls as they darted across the narrow courtyard. Their footsteps were so light they were virtually silent. Within seconds, they reached the tower door. A guard turned his back just as Elias ghosted behind him. A swift strike with the pommel of his knife to the base of the skull sent the soldier slumping down before he could make a sound. The other assassin did the same to the second guard. 2 bodies were dragged into the dark corner. Not a single loud noise was made. The door to the central tower stood open before them. Inside was a spiral stone staircase leading to the upper levels of the stronghold. The air here was cold and damp, a mixture of old stone and torch smoke. Elias stepped forward first. Every step could echo if one trod in the wrong spot. Thus he moved slowly, placing his feet on the edges of the stone steps, where they were less worn. The other followed right behind him. They reached the first floor, then the second. Everything was unnervingly quiet. No guards, no footsteps. Elias began to feel that something was wrong. A lord who feared assassination would never leave his tower so empty. As they reached the 3rd floor, Elias stopped. The large wooden door at the end of the hallway was open. Firelight from within spilled out, casting a long streak of light across the stone floor. The other assassin whispered, "It seems he is still awake." Elias shook his head slightly. It didn't make sense. But before he could say a word, they heard a very faint click from behind. Then instantly, a heavy iron portcullis dropped from the ceiling, sealing off the stairs below. The sound of metal clanging echoed throughout the tower. A trap. The 2 assassins looked at each other in the flickering firelight. And then, footsteps resounded from the hallway ahead, slow, confident. A man stepped out from the brightly lit room. He was tall, silver-haired, draped in a dark red cloak. Lord Aldrich. He looked at the 2 assassins standing in the middle of the hallway and smiled. A cold smile. "I have been expecting you," Aldrich said, his deep voice echoing between the stone walls. The moment he finished speaking, hidden doors in the walls burst open. Guards flooded into the corridor, not 2 or 3, but more than a dozen. All were clad in heavy armor, wielding spears and longswords. The stranger cursed under his breath. "I hate clever lords." Elias gripped his knife tight. The corridor behind was blocked by the iron gate. The front was blocked by guards. There was no retreat. Aldrich took a step back, his gaze cold and observant. "I received word that assassins were coming," he said, "but I did not expect 2. A guard stepped forward. Then a second. Swords drawn from scabbards made a sharp, cold, metallic sound. Elias scanned his surroundings quickly. A small stone window at the end of the hall. The iron gate behind. 12 guards. The chance of survival was very low. But in his line of work, one thing always held true. Even the perfect trap has a weakness. And as the first guard lunged, Elias moved. So fast that the torchlight on the walls seemed to shiver. The battle in the stone halls of Aldrich's fortress had begun. And that night, blood stained the ancient steps of the central tower. Perhaps the sound of the wind outside the window has grown familiar, much like the wind that swept through the ancient stone walls of Aldrich's fortress centuries ago. And at the moment we left off, Elias and the strange assassin were cornered in a narrow corridor, guards ahead and a heavy iron portcullis behind, sealing their only escape. The flames from the wall-mounted torches flickered, casting a blood-red glow upon the soldiers' armor. They advanced step by step, like wolves closing in on their prey. But Elias knew one thing. These men were not hunters. They were merely guards, and guards are seldom accustomed to fighting those who dwell in the shadows. The first soldier lunged with a long sword raised high. Elias stepped aside the very instant the blade swung down. The knife in his hand flashed under the firelight, then vanished. The soldier stiffened. The sword slipped from his grasp. He slumped onto the stone floor with a heavy thud. It all happened too fast. The strange assassin had moved as well. He didn't use a knife, but a curved short sword. 2 clean slashes sent another guard reeling back, blood seeping through the gaps of his gorget. But the guards were too many. Another rushed in from the right, then a third. The cramped corridor quickly descended into a chaotic mess of clashing metal, frantic footsteps, and labored breathing. Elias took a step back, dodging a spear aimed straight for his chest. He realized they couldn't hold this position for long. The space was too confined, and if more reinforcements arrived from behind Lord Aldrich, it would all be over. Elias darted a glance toward the end of the hallway. The small stone window he had spotted earlier. It wasn't large, but it might be enough. "The window," Elias barked. The other assassin understood instantly. Both moved in unison, fighting and retreating toward the end of the hall. A guard tried to block their path, but Elias shoved him hard by the shoulder, sending him staggering. Seconds later, they reached the window. The piercing mountain wind howled through the stone slit, but as Elias looked out, he realized something terrifying. The window was set incredibly high. Below was the sheer vertical drop of the fortress wall, and far beneath that lay the pitch-black courtyard. A jump from here was almost certain death. The strange assassin also peered out and let out a soft laugh despite his ragged breathing. "I hope you have a better plan than that." Elias didn't answer immediately. He scanned the room. Stone walls, torches, and a large tapestry hanging near the window. An idea sparked in his mind. "Grab the tapestry," Elias said. There was no time to explain. They yanked the thick fabric violently from the wall. The iron hooks holding it clattered onto the stone floor. The guards were closing in. Only seconds remained. Elias swiftly tied one end of the tapestry to the iron bars of the window. He threw the other end out. A makeshift rope, long and heavy. The other man looked down into the abyss. "I'm starting to like you." A guard lunged at that very moment. Elias parried the strike with his knife and shoved the soldier into the wall. "You first," he ordered. The other didn't hesitate. He gripped the tapestry and slid down the exterior of the fortress wall. Elias turned back one last time. At the far end of the corridor, Lord Aldrich still stood there, calmly observing it all. His gaze was frozen. "You will not escape," Aldrich said. Elias didn't reply. He simply vaulted through the window, grabbed the tapestry, and slid down into the freezing darkness of the mountain night. The wind roared in his ears. The stone wall blurred past. When his feet finally hit the ground, Elias realized they were at the rear of the fortress, an area almost devoid of guards. The other assassin was already standing there, breathing heavily but still smiling. "We just did the stupidest thing we could have done tonight." But Elias knew one thing. They were still alive. And more importantly, Lord Aldrich was also still alive. High above, in the cold stone tower, torches began to light up as guards scrambled everywhere. The fortress had been alerted. The alarm bells began to toll through the night. The stranger looked up at the high walls. "It seems our mission has only just begun." And Elias understood that from this moment on, they were no longer silent shadows. The entire fortress of Aldrich was now hunting them. If you are still here with this story in the stillness of the night, perhaps your breathing has slowed, and the wind outside sounds like the gale that once circled the stone walls of Aldrich's fortress long ago. Our tale continues right after the moment Elias and the strange assassin slid down the high wall into the freezing darkness of the mountain night. As Elias's feet hit the ground, he immediately moved away from the stone wall, pulling the other man into a patch of darkness behind a row of storehouses. The alarm bells atop the watchtower continued to toll across the fortress. Torchlight began to appear along the ramparts. The guards were waking up. The stranger exhaled a long breath, then looked up at the high walls they had just ascended. "I think," he whispered, "Lord Aldrich will not be very pleased to know we are still alive." Elias didn't answer. He was listening. Footsteps, many footsteps. A squad of soldiers was sprinting across the front courtyard. If they were spotted here, there would be no escape. Elias signaled for silence and led the other man along the rear stone wall of the fortress. This area was much darker. No torches, only the faint moonlight smothered by clouds. A moment later, they approached a row of low wooden doors. The storehouses. Places like this were usually lightly guarded at night. Elias gave a door a gentle push. It opened with a tiny, agonizing creak. Inside, it was dark and thick with the scent of damp wood, dry grain, and leather. Crates were stacked almost to the ceiling. The two stepped inside and closed the door behind them. In the darkness, the stranger let out a soft chuckle. "We just escaped one trap, only for the whole fortress to start hunting us." Elias leaned his back against a wooden crate, thinking. The first strike had failed. Aldrich didn't just know about the assassins beforehand. He had prepared a perfect trap. That meant he had an informant. Someone in the kingdom had warned Aldrich. The stranger seemed to be thinking the same thing. "Who hired you?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "It doesn't matter." The other shrugged. "I suppose many people want Aldrich dead." A cold draft drifted through the door's crevices. Footsteps echoed outside the storehouse. They immediately fell silent. A squad of soldiers passed by, their torchlight sweeping through the cracks in the door in wavering streaks. "Search everywhere!" a soldier shouted. "The Lord wants them alive!" The footsteps gradually faded. Elias scanned the storehouse once more. Something caught his eye. In the corner of the room, there was a small gap in the stone floor between two large slabs. He stepped closer. He gave it a push. The stone shifted slightly. A cellar hatch. The stranger knelt down to help him lift it. Beneath was a narrow staircase leading into a deep, hollow darkness. Cold, damp air rose from below. The other man raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" Elias pondered for a moment. If the guards searched the storehouse, they would be found. And down there, at least it was a hiding place. The two descended the stone stairs. Elias pulled the hatch shut above them. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only a sliver of light remained from an old torch mounted on the wall beneath the stairs. They went deeper. The stairs led to a narrow stone corridor that felt ancient. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming small puddles on the floor. This was no grain cellar, perhaps an old tunnel, built many years ago. The stranger walked slowly, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "Old fortresses always have secret passages," he said. Elias nodded. But as they ventured further into the corridor, they began to notice something strange. There were marks on the walls, chain marks, scratches, as if people had once been held captive here. At the end of the hall stood an iron door. It was old and rusted, but still locked. Elias gave it a push. The door let out a long groan and swung open. Inside was a small room, and in that room stood a stone table. On the table were scrolls of old parchment. The stranger picked one up, unfurling it under the weak torchlight. He fell silent for a few seconds. Then he looked at Elias. "You should see this." Elias stepped forward. On the parchment was a map, but not a map of the fortress. It was a map of various cities and castles throughout the kingdom, and beside each location, there were red marks, a list, names of powerful people. Some names had been crossed out. Elias looked closer. The crossed-out names were all lords who had died within the last few years. The stranger's breath slowed. "It wasn't just Aldrich being hunted," he said. Elias felt a chill run down his spine, because that list was not an assassin's hit list. It looked like Aldrich's own target list. A plan, a conspiracy far greater than they imagined. And as Elias flipped to the final page, he saw a new name, not yet crossed out. A name he recognized instantly. The name of the man who had hired him. In that moment, Elias realized a terrifying truth. His mission was not merely to kill a lord. He had stepped into a secret war between the most powerful men in the kingdom, and Aldrich's fortress was only the beginning. The torch in the ancient tunnel of Aldrich's fortress burned feebly, casting flickering light upon the damp, cold stone walls. In the previous part, Elias and the stranger had found a secret chamber beneath the stronghold. Inside were maps, names, and a long list of the kingdom's lords. Several names had been crossed out. Those men had all died within the last few years. The most terrifying part was the final name on the list, the name of the man who had hired Elias. In the weak torchlight, Elias remained staring at the old parchment. The strange assassin stood beside him, arms crossed in thought. "It seems," he said slowly, "that Aldrich isn't just playing defense." Elias nodded. "He's hunting." The two fell silent for a long moment. Above ground, the alarm bells still tolled in the distance. The guards were likely still scouring every inch of the fortress to find them. But down here, in the ancient tunnel, the world seemed severed from it all. The stranger picked up another scroll. It was a detailed map of Aldrich's fortress, but it was no ordinary map. Upon it, passages were drawn in red ink, tunnels, secret ways, and one of them led straight to the central tower. The other man gave a low whistle. "I'm starting to understand why Aldrich survived 3 assassination attempts." Elias studied the map more closely. There was a tunnel beginning from this very cellar, winding upward beneath the tower. If the map was accurate, they could enter the tower without passing a single guard. But that also meant Aldrich knew of this tunnel. The stranger seemed to read Elias's thoughts. "You think this is another trap?" Elias didn't answer immediately. In his mind, he was piecing the fragments of information together. The list of murdered lords, the maps of the cities, and Aldrich's fortress brimming with soldiers. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Aldrich isn't just defending. He's eliminating anyone who might stand against him." The other raised an eyebrow. "A war before the war even begins." Elias nodded. If Aldrich succeeded, he could become the most powerful man in the realm. But perhaps someone had discovered his plan, and that was why Elias had been hired. The stranger folded the map. "I don't care much for politics," he said, "but I do enjoy finishing a job." Elias felt the same, but this time, their mission was no longer simple. They weren't just hunting a lord. They were trying to stop a conspiracy that could alter the entire kingdom. Elias looked down at the dark tunnel leading deeper into the bowels of the fortress. "This way," he said. The two took a torch and began to follow the tunnel. The air here was colder and damper. The ancient stone walls were carpeted in moss, and they occasionally had to duck to avoid low-hanging stones from the ceiling. The path twisted through the darkness. At times they heard the sound of water flowing somewhere far off. At times, there was only the echo of their own footsteps. After a long trek, the corridor began to slope upward. Elias knew what that meant. They were nearing the tower, but as they rounded a dark corner, both stopped dead. Before them stood a massive stone door, and that door was open. Torchlight from the other side spilled into the hallway. Elias approached slowly. As he peered through the gap, he saw a circular chamber located right at the base of the tower. But it wasn't the room that made him pause. It was the people standing inside, guards, at least 8 of them. And in the center of the room stood Lord Aldrich. He was speaking to a man draped in a black cloak, a spy or perhaps a messenger. Elias heard a sentence ring out clearly in the stone chamber. "The assassins have entered the fortress," Aldrich said, "but that does not matter." The messenger asked, "Are you not concerned, my lord?" Aldrich laughed, a cold, hollow laugh. "No," he said, "because tonight I shall remove one more name from the list." Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs, because the next name might be the very man who had hired him. And if Aldrich succeeded, the entire kingdom might fall into his hands. The stranger looked at Elias. In the flickering torchlight of the ancient tunnel, the two understood they were standing before their final chance. If they failed this time, no one else would ever come for Lord Aldrich, and this time, they could not fail. The torches in the ancient tunnel burned low, their flickering light reflecting off the cold, damp stone walls as Elias and the strange assassin stand just behind the door leading into the circular chamber at the base of the tower. On the other side of that door, Lord Aldrich stands among his guards, completely unaware that the 2 men who just escaped his trap are now so close. Elias keeps his hand steady on the hilt of his knife. The strange assassin stands pressed against the wall on the opposite side of the door, short sword in hand. Both listen. Aldrich's voice rings out clearly in the stone room. "By tomorrow morning," he says, "news will reach every corner of the kingdom that Lord Renwald is dead." Elias stiffens. Renwald, that was the final name on the list. The man who had hired him. The stranger glances at Elias. "It seems we arrived just in time," he whispers. Inside the room, the messenger in the black cloak nods. "And the 2 assassins?" Aldrich laughs softly. They will be found before dawn. One of the guards approaches the stone table, spreading out a map. The torchlight illuminates the roads and castles of the realm. After Renwald, Aldrich continues, the remaining lords will have to choose. Submit or vanish. Elias looks at the stranger. They need no words. If Aldrich survives this night, everything will change. Elias takes a slow, steady breath. Now, they burst through the door simultaneously. Everything happens within a few heartbeats. The guard closest to the door turns just in time to see Elias, but it is already too late. The knife flashes under the torchlight. The soldier falls before he can even scream. The strange assassin lunges to the other side of the room, his short sword slicing through the air, forcing another guard back. In an instant, the circular chamber is plunged into chaos. Guards draw their swords. The ring of metal clashes and echoes off the stone walls. Aldrich retreats behind the table, his gaze sharp and cold. Kill them. Two guards lunge at Elias at once. A sword swings down. Elias steps to the left, using his shoulder to shove the first soldier into the stone wall. His knife strikes fast into the gap of the armor beneath the arm. The second soldier slashes horizontally. Elias ducks low, feeling the blade whistle through the air just above his head. On the other side of the room, the stranger fights in a completely different manner. Swift, fluid. His curved blade traces short arcs of light in the air. One guard falls, then a second, but the numbers are still against them. 4 men, 5 men. One guard pushes Elias back toward the stone table. Elias feels his back hit the edge of the table. He sees Aldrich standing behind it. The Lord's gaze remains calm, too calm, as if he had been waiting for this. Aldrich draws his sword. It is no ornamental blade. It is a true weapon of war. I have killed an assassin before, Aldrich says slowly. I shall kill one more. He steps over the table. The strange assassin sees it happen. Elias, he calls out. But it is too late. Aldrich's sword thrusts forward, faster than Elias expected. Elias parries with his knife, but the force of the impact numbs his arm. Aldrich is no frail aging lord. He is a warrior. The two exchange 2 rapid slashes. Steel grinds against steel, throwing off small sparks. Elias retreats half a step. Aldrich attacks again, faster this time, but at that moment, the stranger lunges from the side, parrying a guard who was trying to close in on Elias. I think, he says between ragged breaths, you should finish this quickly. Elias understands. If they are held here much longer, guards from the upper tower will pour down. Aldrich raises his sword once more. The torches flicker violently on the walls. In that moment, the two look directly into each other's eyes. A lord trying to seize a kingdom, and an assassin hired to end it all. Then Elias moves, swifter than before, so fast that even Aldrich is caught off guard. The knife flashes in the firelight. And in the circular chamber at the base of the tower, the final battle has truly begun. Imagine the torches burning on the ancient stone walls as the circular chamber at the base of Aldrich's tower rings with the clash of steel. At the moment we left off, Elias and Lord Aldrich stood facing each other in the center of the room. Around them lay guards who had either fallen or were struggling to rise after the brief but violent skirmish. The strange assassin was still holding off the remaining 2 guards on the far side of the room. His curved blade moved swiftly in the firelight, yet even he knew the real battle was unfolding in the heart of the chamber. Elias and Aldrich, an assassin, a lord. The two locked eyes for a few fleeting seconds. Aldrich was the first to strike. His longsword lunged forward with speed and power, carrying the weight of a warrior who had fought on true battlefields. Elias parried with his knife, but the impact sent a shudder through his arm. Aldrich did not stop. He pivoted his blade, slashing horizontally. Elias stepped back, feeling a rush of cold air as the edge whistled past his chest. Then Elias counterattacked. His knife was much smaller than Aldrich's sword, but it was fast. A low thrust forced Aldrich to retreat half a step to avoid it. The torchlight flickered on the walls. The shadows of the 2 men danced rapidly across the stone floor. Aldrich gave a soft laugh. You are no ordinary assassin. Elias did not answer. He was waiting. In his years in this trade, he had learned that those who wield longswords often rely on strength, and sometimes on arrogance. Aldrich attacked again, faster. But this time Elias did not retreat. He stepped directly into the danger zone. Aldrich's blade swung down. Elias spun aside at the very last second. The blade skimmed past his shoulder by a hair's breadth, and in the same motion, Elias's knife lunged forward. But Aldrich was also quick. He twisted his wrist, using the hilt of his sword to block the thrust. The two broke apart. On the other side of the room, the strange assassin had just taken down the last guard. He turned just in time to see the two face off once more. I'm starting to think, he said, breathing slightly hard, that this lord isn't as easy to kill as I imagined. Aldrich heard him. He smiled. I have survived more battles than you can imagine. Then he lunged again, this time swifter and more ferocious. The sword traced a long arc of light through the air. Elias parried one strike, then two, but the third caused his knife to slip from the path of the sword. Aldrich's blade cut through his tunic, leaving a long tear. Elias backed away. His breathing grew heavy. Aldrich stepped forward slowly. You are good, he said, but not enough. The strange assassin took a step forward. Do you want help? He asked Elias. Elias shook his head. No. Aldrich raised an eyebrow. Assassin's honor? Elias spoke softly. No. He tightened his grip on the knife. It's just, I want to finish this. A moment of silence. Then Aldrich attacked. The sword came down with all his might, but Elias had waited for that exact moment. He did not parry. He stepped in. The blade slid over his shoulder, and Elias's knife thrust straight forward. In the flickering firelight, the two stood very close. Too close. Aldrich looked down. Elias's knife had pierced the gap between the armor plates. Not deep, but enough. Aldrich stiffened. The sword in his hand clattered onto the stone floor. The room fell silent. The strange assassin walked slowly toward them. Elias withdrew the knife. Aldrich staggered a step and fell to his knees. The torchlight shivered on the wall. Do you think everything ends here? Aldrich said faintly. Elias looked at him. At least your plan ends. Aldrich gave a weak smile. No, he whispered. People like me, there is always another. Then he collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The room was plunged into silence. The strange assassin looked at Elias. I suppose mission accomplished. But Elias knew one thing. Outside this room, the fortress was still full of guards. And when they discovered their lord was dead, this night would still be far from over. Far above the tower. Footsteps began to echo down the stone stairs. The strange assassin sighed. I hate this part. Elias looked toward the tunnel door. We still have a way out. And in the flickering torchlight of the circular chamber, the two assassins prepared for their final escape from the fortress of Aldrich. The torch on the wall burns feebly, thin smoke curling toward the cold stone ceiling. The battle has ended, and Lord Aldrich now lies motionless upon the floor. But the night is not yet over. Elias stands still for a few seconds, looking down at the man the entire kingdom once feared. A powerful lord, a warrior who had survived countless battles, finally fallen in a dark chamber beneath his own stronghold. The strange assassin breaks the silence. I imagine, he says softly, that this news will come as quite a shock to many. Elias wipes the blade on Aldrich's tunic before sheathing it. That news is only valuable if we leave this place alive. The other man nods. Above, the thud of footsteps begins to echo down the spiral stone staircase of the tower. Guards. Perhaps they heard the sounds of combat, or sensed that something was gravely wrong. The stranger scans the room. We have two choices, he says. One is to fight the entire fortress. He shrugs. I'm not fond of that option. Elias looks toward the door leading back to the tunnel. We take the way below. The two quickly exit the circular chamber, retracing their steps into the stone corridor they had traversed before. Elias grabs a torch from the wall, its pale yellow light illuminating the narrow path stretching into the gloom. Behind them, the voices of the guards begin to ring out more clearly. A voice from the stairs. Where is the Lord? A second of silence, then a scream. They have found Aldrich's body. The alarm bells toll once more violently this time. The strange assassin gives a soft laugh. I think we've made them angry. Elias does not look back. He quickens his pace along the ancient tunnel. The stone passage slopes downward, twisting through several dark turns. Droplets of water fall from the ceiling, creating a steady, rhythmic dripping. But the deeper they go, the more Elias realizes something. This path is not the same as the one they took to get here. The stranger realizes it too. I think, he says slowly, this tunnel is longer than I imagined. Elias recalls the map in his mind. Secret tunnels rarely lead to only one place. They often have multiple exits. One of them might lead outside the fortress walls. After several minutes of rapid movement, they reach a fork. 3 dark corridors. The stranger frowns. Do you remember the way? Elias looks at the stone wall. Then he spots a small carving near the ground. An old symbol nearly worn away. An arrow. Someone had marked the way before. Elias points to the corridor on the left. That way. The two press on. The sound of the alarm bells behind them still echoes faintly, but it gradually fades as they venture deeper underground. The air here is colder, and it smells of damp earth. After a long stretch, the hallway begins to slope upward. Elias recognizes it immediately. We're nearly out. The stranger breathes a sigh of relief. I'm starting to like ancient tunnels. Finally, they see an old wooden door at the end of the path. Elias gives it a push. The door opens slowly. The cold night wind rushes in. Outside lies a dark forest surrounding the fortress. The two step out of the tunnel. Behind them, Aldrich's fortress still blazes with torchlight. Guards run along the ramparts, their shouts echoing into the night. But Elias and the strange assassin are already beyond the reach of the stone walls. Here there is only the forest, the wind, and the darkness. The stranger turns back to look at the fortress one last time. I imagine, he says, that place will be in chaos by morning. Elias looks toward the trail cutting through the woods. That is no longer our concern. The two begin to walk into the forest. A while later, when the fortress is nothing more than a distant light behind them, the stranger asks a question he has held since the beginning of the night. Elias. Elias does not break his stride. Yes? After all this, why, what will you do? Elias thinks for a moment. The life of an assassin is always the same. One mission, then another. But tonight, something has changed. I don't know yet, he says. The stranger laughs softly. I think we will meet again. Elias doesn't answer. But deep down, he knows one thing. Tonight was only the end of a mission, not the end of the path he is walking. And in the dark forest under a sky full of stars, the two assassins continue to walk forward, leaving the chaos of Aldrich's fortress far behind. From the dark paths of the kingdom and the impoverished villages to the cold stone walls of Aldrich's fortress, the battle beneath the ancient tower has finally come to an end. And now the story draws to a close. A night breeze blows gently through the dark forest, the high canopy rustling softly. The trail before Elias and the stranger is but a narrow strip of earth, nearly vanishing amidst the grass and tangled roots. Behind them, Aldrich's fortress is nothing more than a distant speck of light in the gloom. The two walk in silence for a long while. The steady chorus of night insects fills the air. Finally, the strange assassin breaks the silence. Do you realize, he says, we've fought side by side all night, and we still don't know each other's names? Elias glances over. You never asked. The other man gives a soft laugh. I'm asking now. Elias ponders for a moment, then speaks. Elias. The stranger nods. The name is Rowan. They continue their stride through the woods. A while later, they reach a small stream cutting across the path. The clear water reflects the fading moonlight. Elias stops to drink. Rowan sits down on a nearby boulder. Do you know what happens now? Rowan asks. Elias shakes his head slightly. Rowan looks up at the sky. News of Aldrich's death will spread quickly. The lords who once feared him will breathe a sigh of relief. Others will begin to scramble for power. Elias understands. A lord dies, but the world never stops. It only changes. Rowan continues. And there is one more. Elias looks at him. Renwald? The man who hired Elias. Rowan speaks slowly. When Renwald hears that Aldrich is dead, he will become the most powerful man in the region. Elias remains silent. That was exactly what had unsettled him since he first saw the list in the tunnel. Perhaps Aldrich wasn't the only one playing the Game of Thrones. Rowan watches Elias with a gaze slightly different than before. Do you ever think that we are just pawns? Elias gives a faint smile. I've known that for a long time. The wind sighs through the trees. Leaves rustle. After a moment, Rowan stands up. My path turns north. He points to a small trail leading deep into the woods. And yours? Elias looks toward the horizon where the faint glow of dawn begins to emerge. I'm going to see Renwald. Rowan raises an eyebrow. Going to collect your reward? Elias pauses for a few seconds. Perhaps, but in his voice there is something else. Rowan smiles. I think you're going to do something much more interesting. The two look at each other one last time. No further words are needed. Those who dwell in the shadows understand one truth. The paths of assassins rarely cross for long. Rowan turns and disappears into the northern woods. Within minutes, he is gone among the trees. Elias stands alone by the stream. The first light of dawn breaks over the horizon. A new day, a new mission. He recalls Aldrich's final words in the stone chamber. People like me, there is always another. Elias looks down at the water's surface. Renwald hired him to kill Aldrich, but if Aldrich was right, then perhaps Renwald is walking the exact same path. Elias stands up. He begins to walk toward the road leading to Renwald's castle, not to receive a reward, but to find answers, and if necessary, To end another story, as the sun gradually rises over the quiet forest, Elias continues his long journey, because such is the life of a medieval assassin. Dangerous, solitary, and rarely ever finding a true end. The story only pauses before a new chapter begins. Imagine for a moment that you are not a knight in shining armor, nor a lord dwelling in a warm castle. Instead, you are an assassin, a ghost in the darkness, taking on the tasks that no one else dares to touch. And if you lived in the Middle Ages, just how difficult would that life be? The story begins on a frigid morning in a small village nestled within vast, sprawling forests. Mist blankets the low wooden roofs, and the crow of a rooster echoes from afar. You wake up on a hard straw mattress in a cheap inn. There are no servants, no grand hearths, only a worn satchel by the wall and a knife hidden beneath your pillow. You cannot afford to sleep too deeply. People like you never do. Outside, the villagers begin their toil in the fields. But you are different. You have no land, no family waiting at home. Your work only appears when someone needs something to disappear from this world. You throw an old cloak over your shoulders and head down the inn's stairs. The innkeeper eyes you with suspicion. In the Middle Ages, strangers are always noticed, especially those who carry weapons. You buy a bowl of watery porridge and a piece of stale bread. An assassin's breakfast is never a luxury. The gold earned from a contract might be plenty at times, but most of the time, you must save every coin just to survive the months of silence. As you finish eating, a man sitting in the corner rises and approaches. He wears a dark cloak, half his face obscured by a hood. "You are the one I am looking for," he says quietly. Such conversations always take place in silence. No one wants to overhear what is about to be said. He places a small pouch on the table. Inside are a few silver coins. "Merely a deposit," he says. "The rest will be paid upon completion." You don't ask many questions. In the world of an assassin, the fewer the questions, the longer the life. This task lies in a town 2 days' journey away. A wealthy merchant, a man who has made far too many enemies during his trading ventures. You leave the village before the sun climbs high. The dirt road snakes through forests and vast meadows. In the Middle Ages, travel is never easy. There are no swift carriages, no safe highways. Only trails where bandits, wild beasts, and patrols could appear at any moment. An assassin cannot draw attention, so you walk just like any other poor traveler. The first day passes in the silence of the woods. You sleep beneath a great tree, hand always resting near your knife. The forest night is bone-chilling, and sometimes you hear sounds, unable to tell if they belong to beast or man. That is one of the greatest hardships of a medieval assassin's life. You aren't always fighting. Most of the time, you are just trying to stay alive. On the second day, you draw near the town. Wooden walls surround the marketplace, and smoke from the smithies rises into the gray sky. To complete the mission, you must be patient. A good assassin never acts immediately. You spend days observing the target. The merchant lives in a grand house near the market. He has 2 guards and a hunting dog. By day, he trades. By night, he dines with friends. You sit in the tavern, posing as a peddler. You listen to the town gossip. Who goes where, who does what, and when the town gates are barred. An assassin must understand the ground he stands on. Finally, after days of watching, you discover a pattern. Late every evening after the taverns close, the merchant always walks home alone through the alley behind the market. It is the only moment he is without his guards. That night, a light rain falls. The streets are muddy and slick. Torches on the city walls flicker weakly under the biting wind. You stand in the shadows of the alley, heart beating slowly, breath steady. An assassin must be as patient as stone. Then finally you hear footsteps. The merchant appears at the mouth of the alley, cloak pulled high against the rain. He does not see you. No one ever sees the assassin until the final moment. You step out from the dark. Everything happens very fast. No scream, no long struggle, only a few seconds. Then silence returns to the dark alley. You leave the town before dawn. In the world of an assassin, staying behind after a job is the most dangerous thing you can do. 2 days later, you meet your employer again at a roadside inn. He pushes the remaining pouch of coins across the table. "Good work," he says. You take the money, but there is no sense of victory in your heart. Because you know one thing. Tomorrow, there will be another mission, another road, another cold night in the woods. The life of a medieval assassin is nothing like the glamorous tales. There is no fame, no castle, no epic poems. Only long roads, dark forests, and the tasks you must complete in silence. And if you truly lived in that era, the hardest part wouldn't be the killing. It would be surviving long enough to see another dawn. Because in the world of medieval assassins, every day that passes could very well be your last. The fire in the hearth burns low, and outside, the wind sighs through the dark medieval forests. In the previous part, we followed an assassin wandering the long dirt roads, living in silence and completing a perilous mission in a strange town. But that was only a fragment of this life, because if you are truly an assassin in the Middle Ages, the hardship does not end when the mission is complete. After receiving the pouch of coin from your employer, you leave the roadside inn before the sun rises. No one wants to be seen for too long in the same place. In the Middle Ages, rumors spread faster than the wind. A single person's suspicion is enough to set the whole town talking. So you press on. The road leads north where the forests grow thicker and small villages lie scattered beside freezing streams. The autumn air grows sharper by the day. Morning frost clings to the grass and your cloak. You carry the payment from your last job, but you cannot afford to spend much. An assassin must always think of the days without work. There are times when you must survive for months on what you earned long ago. That is something many do not understand. They think an assassin is always wealthy, but the truth is, most of the time you are just a poor traveler, drifting from one town to the next, sleeping in cold, drafty rooms. A week later you arrive at a larger city. High stone walls enclose the marketplace and guards are always stationed at the gates. As you enter, they eye you closely. Men bearing weapons always draw the attention of the watch. You bow your head like an ordinary peddler and pass through the gates. The city is far noisier than the villages before. Vendors, blacksmiths, merchants, and carts laden with goods clatter across the cobblestone streets. But in the world of assassins, crowded places are the most dangerous because there are always eyes watching. You find a small inn near the market. Not too grand, but enough to avoid notice. The following days pass in waiting. Sometimes it takes a long time before a new contract appears. You sit in the tavern listening to the tales of merchants and mercenaries. You hear of disputes between lords, unpaid debts, and wealthy families harboring bitter feuds. Stories like these usually lead to work for people like you. One evening, as the tavern begins to fill, a man in a black cloak enters. He says nothing as he sits at the table opposite yours. He simply places a gold ring on the table. That is the sign. People in this world never speak directly of what they want. You look at the ring for a few seconds before pushing it back. What is the task? The man speaks in a low voice meant only for your ears. A knight. You are slightly surprised. Missions like this are far more dangerous. Knights are not wealthy merchants. They have been trained in combat since childhood. They wear armor, and they are usually guarded. The man continues. He is staying in the castle west of the city. You look out the window. Far off atop a high hill stands a massive stone castle. High walls, watchtowers, torches burning throughout the night. It is a place an assassin finds very difficult to enter, and even harder to leave. You remain silent for a long while. A mission like this could bring much gold, but it could also end your life. Finally you ask, how much? The man slides a heavy pouch of coin across the table. The faint clink of metal echoes from within. You don't even need to open it to know it is more than all your previous tasks combined. And that is the greatest temptation of an assassin's life. Gold always appears alongside danger. You accept the pouch. The man stands up immediately and leaves the tavern as if he had never been there. That night you do not sleep much. Through the window of your room, you watch the castle on the hill. The torches on the rampart still burn in the night wind. An assassin faces many hardships in the Middle Ages. It is not just the fighting. It is decisions like these. You must ask yourself one question. Is that pouch of gold worth trading your life for? But as dawn arrives, you already know the answer. You throw your cloak over your shoulders, tuck your familiar knife into your belt. Then you begin to walk the path leading to the castle. Because in the world of assassins, once you have accepted the task, the road ahead only leads in one direction, toward the danger. The medieval sky is gradually darkening. A cold wind blows across the barren hills, and far off on the highest peak, the stone castle of the knight you must find stands silently in the gloom. In the previous part, you accepted a mission more perilous than any you had ever faced. The target this time is not a merchant, nor a wealthy peddler, but a knight living in a castle fortified by stone walls, guards, and hounds. It is a place an assassin finds near impossible to enter, and even harder to leave. As the sun sets behind the western forests, you begin your ascent toward the hill where the castle looms. The dirt path winds upward, snaking through thickets and jagged boulders. You do not approach the main gate. No assassin ever does. Instead, you circle to the rear of the hill, where the trees are denser and the sentries fewer. The wind carries the scent of smoke from the torches on the ramparts. When night finally blankets the sky, you pause beneath the shadow of a great oak tree. From here you can see the castle's rear wall. 2 watchtowers, a side postern, and a few guards patrolling the battlements. You observe with patience. An assassin is never in a hurry. Time moves slowly in the darkness. An owl hoots somewhere deep in the woods. The torchlight on the walls flickers weakly in the wind. After a long while, you notice a pattern. Every few minutes, the 2 guards on the watchtower turn their backs as they round the corner of the wall. For only a few brief seconds, it is the only window. You wait for several more patrol cycles to be certain. Then when the moment arrives, you move. Swift yet silent, you sprint across the dark grass behind the castle, keeping your body low to the ground. Rocks and bushes become your cover. Not a sound is made. Reaching the base of the stone wall, you pull out a rope with a small iron grapple. Assassins who live long enough always carry such tools. You toss the hook toward the edge of the wall. The sound of metal meeting stone is faint, but in the dead of night it makes your heart hammer against your ribs. No alarm is raised. You begin to climb. The stone walls of a castle are never easy to scale. Moss and moisture make the stones slick. Every foothold must be chosen with absolute care. Finally, you reach the top. You pull yourself up and lie flat against the cold stone floor. A few paces away, a guard stands with his back turned, gazing out toward the forest. You wait. Wait for the wind to gust harder and the nearby torch to flare and flicker. Then you strike. Just a few steps, fast and precise. By the time the soldier realizes something is behind him, it is already too late. You drag him into the shadows of the watchtower. No cry, no alarm, only the wind whistling over the high wall. You hide the soldier's body in a dark corner and look down into the inner courtyard. There are more guards than you anticipated. One group sits huddled around a fire. Another patrols near the stables. And in the center of the keep stands the great hall where the knight resides. The windows on the second floor are still lit. Perhaps he is still awake. You begin to move along the wall, searching for a way down to the courtyard without being seen. Finally, you spot a narrow stone staircase leading down near the storehouse. You slip down the stairs. The shadows in the rear courtyard are denser. Wooden crates and supply wagons create a maze of blind spots. But just as you pass a stable, a low growl echoes. You freeze. A massive hound is staring directly at you from the darkness. Castle hounds are trained to detect strangers. If it barks, the entire castle will wake. You slowly extend your hand, trying to remain calm. The dog inches closer. It sniffs the air. Your heart pounds. In that moment, you understand one thing. The hardships of a medieval assassin aren't just about facing men. Sometimes, a loyal animal can be the ruin of any plan. The dog takes another step. You grip your knife tight, and in the shadows of the castle courtyard, your next decision will determine whether you survive the night or become the prey of the entire castle. Imagine we are still standing in the rear courtyard of the ancient castle atop the hill. The night wind whistles through the high stone walls. The torches on the watchtowers flicker, and in the darkness, a massive hound is staring you down. In the previous part, you scaled the castle walls, evaded the sentries, and slipped silently into the inner courtyard. But sometimes, the greatest danger is not human. It is the animals trained to detect anyone who does not belong. The hound stands just a few paces away. Its thick fur bristles, its eyes glowing in the dark. It hasn't barked yet, but you know that with a single loud bay, every guard in the castle will come running. You stand perfectly still. Your breathing slows. An assassin must control themselves even in the most gut-wrenching moments. The dog inches closer, its nose twitching as it sniffs the air. Perhaps it is trying to identify the foreign scent on your cloak. Slowly, you crouch down, your other hand remaining near your blade. From your pouch, you pull out a small piece of dried meat. Travelers often carry this for sustenance, but sometimes it serves other purposes. You gently toss the meat toward the corner of the stables. The hound turns its head. It catches the scent and steps toward the offering. That moment is your window. You move instantly, swift yet silent. Within seconds, you have left the stables behind and slipped deeper into the shadows of the inner court. Before you lies the main keep. Its thick stone walls and narrow windows mark it as the residence of the knight you seek. But approaching the building is no simple feat. 2 guards are patrolling the entrance. One carries a torch, one carries a spear. The firelight stretches their shadows long across the stony ground. You hide behind an old supply wagon and observe. They pace back and forth in a familiar rhythm. 1 lap, 2 laps, 3 laps. After a while, you notice a small detail. Every time they reach the left corner of the building, the torchbearer turns to speak to his companion for a few brief seconds. A very short window, but enough for a man to move through. You wait for one more cycle. Then as they turn their backs, you step out of the darkness. Just a few quick strides across the open courtyard. You press your back against the cold stone wall of the keep. Your heart is still drumming, but no shout echoes behind you. You made it. The stone is cold beneath your palms as you find a low window near the corner. It is small, but there are no iron bars, only a wooden shutter left slightly ajar. You give it a gentle push. The door opens with a tiny creak. Inside is a dark room. You slide through the window and drop onto the cold stone floor. The space inside is quiet. It seems to be a storehouse or a servant's quarters. Wooden crates and burlap sacks are lined along the walls. You light a small candle from a wall-mounted lamp and begin to step out into the corridor. A castle at night has a very different atmosphere. By day, it is full of voices and footsteps, but when night falls, only the wind remains, sighing through the cracks in the doors. The long hallway leads toward a stone staircase. You tread lightly. An assassin must always remember that in places like this, the slightest sound can be heard. You ascend the stairs. The second floor is slightly brighter. Candlelight spills out from a door at the end of the corridor. Someone is inside. You draw closer, keeping yourself in the shadows of the wall. Through the crack in the door, you see a wide room with a large wooden table and several maps spread across its surface. And there, the knight is sitting. He is not in armor, wearing only a heavy cloak, reading a scroll by candlelight. This is the moment many assassins live for. The target is right before your eyes. No guards in the room. Just a few steps and it would all be over. But as you look closer at the table, you notice something strange. Those are not land maps, they are maps of trade routes, and upon them are numerous red marks. The red marks are positioned exactly where merchants have been killed in recent months, including the man you killed in the previous town. You stand frozen in the darkness. We are still standing in the second floor corridor of the ancient castle. The candle on the wall burns low, and the night wind whistling through the stone doorframe creates a faint, ghostly sound. And right before your eyes, the door to the knight's chamber remains slightly ajar. In the previous part, you entered the castle under the cover of darkness, evaded the sentries, avoided the hound, and silently ascended to the second floor. The objective of your mission is right in the room ahead. But then, you discovered something that changed everything. The maps on the knight's table marked numerous trade routes, and the red marks on those maps coincided with the locations where people had recently been assassinated, including the merchant you killed in the previous town. You stand frozen in the shadows of the corridor. In your years as an assassin, you have rarely questioned your mission. Your job was simple: take the coin, find the target, finish the task. But this time, nothing is simple anymore. You peer through the gap once more. The knight is still sitting at the table, candlelight illuminating his contemplative face. He holds a quill, occasionally jotting something down on a scroll. He does not look like a man preparing for war. He looks like a man trying to solve a mystery. Your mind races. If the red marks on the map are where the assassinations occurred, then this knight might be investigating them. If so, the one who hired you might be trying to silence him. A chilling thought crosses your mind. Perhaps you are merely a piece in a much larger game. While you are lost in thought, a very faint sound echoes behind you. Footsteps. At the end of the hallway, a guard is making his rounds. You quickly press yourself against the wall. Darkness swallows you just as the soldier passes by. He carries a small torch, its light flickering through the corridor for a few seconds before vanishing down the stairs. Your breathing slows. Time is running out. If you continue to stand here, sooner or later someone will find you. You look at the knife in your hand. Then you look back into the room. Finally, you make a decision unlike any in your previous missions. You knock softly on the door. A very faint knock. Inside the room, the knight raises his head. He looks toward the door. "Is someone there?" he asks. You push the door open slowly and step inside. The candlelight hits you directly. The knight stands up instantly. His hand rests on the hilt of the sword hanging beside the table. The two of you lock eyes for a few seconds. You can clearly see the wariness in his gaze. "Who are you?" he asks. You do not answer immediately. Instead, you step closer to the table and look down at the maps. "You are investigating the assassinations," you say. The knight falls silent. His gaze shifts from you to the knife in your hand. Then he understands. You are an assassin. You do not deny it. In the quiet room of the castle, there is only the sound of the wind sighing through the cracks. The knight lets out a very soft sigh. "I suppose they finally sent someone." You look at him. "You knew?" He nods. "I have discovered too much." He points to the map on the table. "The murdered merchants, the caravans attacked. They are all connected to a massive trade network." You recall the man who hired you in the tavern. The gold ring, the black cloak. The knight continues. "There are very powerful people behind this. They are controlling the trade routes by eliminating anyone who refuses to cooperate." He looks you straight in the eye. "And I am getting too close to the truth." You stand still. Everything begins to make sense. The merchant in the previous town, this unusual mission, the pouch of gold larger than normal. Perhaps you weren't hired to kill a villain. You were hired to kill the only man trying to stop it all. At that very moment, the sound of footsteps echoes from the stairs. Not just one person. Many. Guards are coming up to this floor. Perhaps they have discovered something within the castle. The knight hears the sound. He looks at you. "It seems," he says slowly, "that tonight more than one assassin has come here." You turn your head toward the dark corridor. Torchlight begins to appear at the head of the stairs. It could be the guards, but it could also be others who were sent to ensure that no one in this room leaves alive. In the small room on the second floor of the ancient castle, you and the knight stand facing each other. Two people who were meant to be enemies, but in that moment, both understand that the true danger might be stepping up the stairs right now. Imagine we are still standing in that small room on the second floor of the ancient castle. The candle on the table burns slowly, its pale yellow light spilling over the spread-out maps. Out in the corridor, the sound of footsteps is echoing up the stone stairs. In the previous part, you entered the knight's chamber, prepared to complete your mission. But then you discovered something unexpected. The red marks on the map revealed that he was investigating a series of assassinations tied to the trade routes. That meant the person who hired you was likely trying to silence him. And right now those footsteps are coming up the stairs. Not just one person. Many. You and the knight turn your heads toward the door in unison. Torchlight begins to bleed into the corridor. Shadows shift against the stone walls. The knight speaks in a low whisper. "My guards do not usually come to this floor at this hour." That could only mean one thing. Those who are coming are not the castle's men. You tighten your grip on the knife in your hand. The chamber door shudders slightly as someone paces past in the hallway. The faint clink of metal against metal. The unmistakable sound of weaponry. A deep voice rings out from outside. "Check every room." You and the knight lock eyes. No further words are needed. Both of you understand that those men have come for the same reason. To ensure that no one in this room remains alive. The knight moves quickly to the wall, grabbing a long sword from its rack. He draws the blade, the steel flashing in the candlelight. You step toward the window, glancing down at the castle courtyard. Below, several actual guards lie motionless near the side gate. The attackers entered the castle before you did. The knight whispers, "How many?" You listen intently to the footsteps. "At least 4, perhaps more." He nods. Then we are left with few choices. An assassin and a knight standing in the same room. A situation neither had likely ever imagined. The footsteps stop right before the door. A shadow falls across the threshold. Then the door is kicked open. The first man to enter wears a dark cloak, identical to the one worn by the man who hired you in the tavern. But this man says nothing. The curved sword in his hand lunges forward immediately. The knight parries the strike with his blade. The screech of metal rings out piercingly in the small room. You lunge to the right as a second man enters. The knife in your hand moves like a blur in the candlelight. The battle in the cramped room unfolds with brutal speed. The attackers move like professional killers. They do not speak. They do not cry out. Every movement is precise and lethal. The knight fights with the bearing of a warrior who has endured many true battles. His longsword keeps the enemy in front of him at bay. Meanwhile, you move close and fast. A dodge, a knife thrust. One attacker staggers back, clutching a wounded arm. But just as you pivot, another shadow lunges from behind. You duck just in time as the blade whistles through the air inches above your head. The room descends into chaos. The footsteps in the corridor suggest more men are still reaching the floor. The knight delivers a powerful horizontal slash, forcing his opponent back several paces. He turns to you. "We cannot hold this room for long," you nod. In battles like these, standing still is the fastest way to die. You scan the room rapidly. Behind the map table, there is a small door you hadn't noticed before. "That door," you say. The knight understands instantly. He drives back the attacker in front of him with a heavy blow and retreats toward the table. You kick the large wooden table aside, clearing the path to the small door behind it. An attacker rushes forward to stop you, your knife clashing against his sword. You stand inches apart in the flickering candlelight. You twist your wrist, sliding the blade through a gap in his armor. He collapses onto the stone floor. The knight throws open the small door. Behind it lies a narrow staircase descending into the abyss. "A secret passage," he says quickly. The pounding of footsteps in the hallway grows louder. You don't need to think twice. The two of you plunge into the stone staircase. The knight slams the door shut behind you, sliding a heavy wooden bolt across. Outside, a violent thudding begins against the wood. But you and he have already started down the dark stairs. The air in the tunnel is cold and damp. The sound of dripping water echoes in the darkness. After a few steps, you see a faint torch mounted on the wall. Both of you pause for a few seconds to catch your breath. Above, the pounding continues. The attackers will break through soon. The knight looks at you in the dim firelight. "It seems," he says slowly, "that the one who hired you hired other assassins as well." You nod. In this world, the powerful always prepare multiple contingencies. If one assassin fails, another will follow. The knight grips his sword tight. "Then we must find the one behind all of this." You look down the tunnel stretching into the blackness. The road ahead is no longer a simple mission. It has become a much larger hunt. A hunt where, this time, the target is not the knight, but the one who has been pulling the strings of every assassin from the shadows. If you are still here with this story in the stillness of the night, then we have traveled far together. From the freezing dirt road where your journey began, to the stone walls of the castle and the sudden clash in the small second-floor chamber. And now, the tale is drawing toward its conclusion. In the previous part, you and the knight were forced to fight side by side when other assassins unexpectedly stormed the keep. After a brief but fierce skirmish, the two of you escaped down a secret staircase into the ancient tunnels beneath the castle. Now you stand in the gloom of that passage. The torch on the wall burns feebly, casting a dim light upon the damp stone. The sound of footsteps above has faded, but you know those men will soon find the way down. The knight stands beside you, sword still in hand. He gazes toward the tunnel stretching out before you. "This leads to the forest behind the hill," he says. You nod. The air in the tunnel is cold and carries the scent of ancient earth. The weathered stones suggest this place existed long before the castle was ever built. The two of you begin to walk. Footsteps echo softly in the narrow corridor. The torchlight flickers with every small draft of wind blowing through the cracks in the rock. After a while, the knight speaks slowly. "I think you are beginning to understand what is truly happening." You look at him. "The man who hired me?" He nods. "Precisely." He pauses before a bend in the tunnel and turns to face you. For months, independent merchants have been murdered. Supply caravans have vanished. Vital trade routes have fallen into the hands of a single group. You recall the map on the table, the red marks, the names of the dead. The knight continues. "There is a very wealthy merchant named Valric. He is attempting to seize control of every major trade route in the region." A chill runs down your spine. "The man in the black cloak." The knight eyes you. "You have met him?" You recall the gold ring on the table in the tavern. You nod. The knight exhales slowly. "I found his trail. But before I could send word to the other lord, he began sending assassins." The two of you press deeper into the tunnel. Up ahead, a colder draft of air blows inward. The exit is near. You think back on all your previous missions. The people who died. The pouches of coin paid after every job. Perhaps it was all part of Valric's design, a scheme to eliminate anyone standing in his way. Finally, moonlight appears at the end of the tunnel. The two of you step outside. The forest behind the castle is quiet under a starlit sky. The wind sighs through the high canopy. The castle stands far behind the hill, torches still burning upon its walls. The knight gazes back for a long moment. "Those men will soon realize I have escaped." You look toward the trail cutting through the woods. "Where is Valric?" The knight speaks. "In the city to the east, in the great manor near the marketplace." Both stand in silence for a few seconds. An assassin and a knight, two who were meant to be enemies. But tonight, everything has changed. The night looks at you. You could leave. This is no longer your mission. You remain silent. In the life of an assassin, you have always taken coin to do another's bidding. But this time, for the first time, you realize you have been used as a mere tool. You remember the merchant in the dark alley, the red marks on the map, the assassins attacking the castle. You speak slowly. The road to the east. The night nods. The two of you begin to walk into the forest. Dawn will arrive in a few hours. A new day will begin, but this time, you are no longer an assassin on a mission. You are hunting the man who hired you, and perhaps it will be the most dangerous task of your life. The wind blows gently through the trees as two shadows vanish into the night. In the distance, the road to the eastern city stretches out under the moonlight. There, this story may finally end. Or perhaps it has only just begun.